said 2 months ago, not at this press conference, he said, I'm not coming back, stop asking me if I'm finished. Yesterday, he said 90-95%, so you seem to be, opening the window.
It's a plus. We went from 0% to 5 to 10%. In all the private conversations, I've never heard him, say even 90 or 95%. Personally, he looks pretty content. He looks pretty happy being connected with the sport as a promoter and really not being in the gym. But I think if something piques his interest, if it's, who knows, maybe the winner of Garcia Thurman, maybe he sees something in that fight which draws his attention. Certainly, we'll be calling him after that fight and saying, asking him what he thought. But I think we're at a point where, he's going to be 40 next month. He looks very comfortable. 19 years in the sport is a long time in this endeavor. It's a long time in any job, but in boxing it's a lifetime. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if we didn't see him in the ring ever again.
What about the cage? Do you still see, I'm sorry. Do you still see the McGregor-Mayweather thing as basically a non-starter for several reasons? The first being probably Dana White has an ironclad contract with the guy and would have to give him the go-ahead to do boxing. Is it still a non-starter to you? And is it just a waste of time for us to talk about it?
From everything that I've heard, it's not something that the UFC is interested in, that fairly well settles it. I mean, certainly there are legal arguments to be made, but none of those, all of those are arguments. In dealing in the reality, the UFC is opposed to it, and so they have the contractual relationship. If they're, if in the future things change and there's an opportunity, maybe there are conversations to be had and meaningful conversations in that. But until then, it's just sort of it's speculation and really just hype.
Right. Is that something you guys would be interested in, though? If
I think it would be a massive event. If there was an opportunity to do that, it would be a fascinating promotion. You've got two massive personalities in a massive event. And there's precedent for it. We've seen these kinds of things, and in some ways, it was this kind of matchup that even led to the birth of UFC. So there's a certain sort of logic and circularity to it. But again, there's a long way between here and there, so it's really just a hypothetical at this point.
From a logistics standpoint, would something like that be more difficult to put together than the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight? Obviously, working with HBO, and in this case, you'd have to work with the UFC.
I'm not sure that even a Middle East peace negotiation would be more difficult than Mayweather-Pacquiao. So, I think it could be done relatively quickly. If all the parties were on board. But like I said, until there's either UFC's consent or some other change in the contractual and legal restrictions, it's really just a fantasy game.
When he says on the A side, what does he mean by that? The governing of the promotion.
Good question. I think Floyd, views it as appropriate. So, like, he's been a megastar for a decade. He's been on top of his sport for a decade. He's been on top of, the media and the sports industry for a decade plus. So I think as much of a personality as McGregor is, I think that's his way of saying, look, let's put this in perspective. He may be hot right now, but I've been doing this for the last decade.
One last question for me, and one last question about the whole Mayweather-McGregor nonsense. If that fight were to happen, do you think that would do more numbers than the Pacquiao fight?
It's interesting. It's tough for me to think of anybody who bought Mayweather-Pacquiao who wouldn't buy Mayweather-McGregor. It sort of, maybe there are some, and I look at it, and as soon as the fight was over, we thought we'll never see that kind of volume again. Maybe we would with a fight like Mayweather-McGregor.
I lied. I have one more question.
Okay.
Since we brought it up. The Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. Do you think that had an impact on pay-per-views now?
I don't. I mean, we are now going on, coming on to, look, almost 2 years from the event, and people are still using that as a scapegoat. The reality is, a lot of these pay-per-views should not have been pay-per-views. And when they don't do numbers, people look for excuses. And it's becoming more and more of a stretch to say something two years ago was affecting the pay-per-view business now. No, I think people need to look themselves in the mirror and really realize a lot of these fights don't belong on pay-per-view. It had nothing to do with Mayweather-Pacquiao. These are fights which are great fights on cable TV, but this is not a hangover on Mayweather-Pacquiao.
Yeah.
Step your game.
That's all I got.
Step your game up. Then you won't have these issues.
Meeting of the Giants.
You can't put on these. Look, it's one industry leader out there, and excuse me, that's Showtime. The industry leader and putting on the great fights.